Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. The rule of 3 a.m. When I initially started driving long distances, my dad taught me about the 3 a.m. rule. He would say that after 3 in the morning, nothing nice happens on the roads. The world is then owned by people you don't want to meet. Until that October night, when I was driving back from my cousin's wedding in remote Montana, I assumed it was simply old-fashioned paranoia. The reception had been delayed, and instead of booking a motel room, I had erroneously assumed I could make it through the 6-hour trip home. I was already regretting that choice by 2:30 in the morning. The highway continued on indefinitely, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through forest and farmland, with perhaps another vehicle in sight every 10 minutes. When I saw the truck behind me, I was halfway between Billings and nothing. My rearview mirror initially only showed headlights, nothing out of the ordinary. However, as those lights never appeared to approach or retreat as the miles passed, they kept the same distance, perhaps 4 miles behind me, precisely matching my speed. The truck also slowed down as I slowed down to test my notion. It also accelerated when I reached 75 miles per hour. The headlights never flickered or were shifted in relation to my car. It felt like a shadow was following you. It was only a coincidence, I told myself. Perhaps the driver was simply traveling at the same speed while utilizing cruise control. It's possible that they were also half asleep, blindly following tail lights. When people were exhausted, they acted strangely. Then I saw something that gave me the chills. The truck's high beams flashed once every several minutes. It occurred with a nearly mechanical regularity, and only once, like a signal. Flash, await precisely 3 minutes. Flash once more. Using the clock on my dashboard, I began counting, 3 minutes each time. The last sign I saw said the next exit was 15 miles distant. To see if the truck would follow me off the highway, I made the decision. I would know it was merely paranoia if it didn't. If it did, I would discover that when I arrived. I put on my blinker early and began to slow down as I got closer to exit 127, a tiny interchange that led to what appeared to be a rural village. I looked at the truck's headlights in my mirror. They went on straight for a while, and I felt a wave of comfort. Just a case of paranoia. The truck then started to leave behind me as its brake lights came on. The off-ramp led to a T-junction, where a small, overnight closed gas station was located on one corner. Despite my headlights' limited visibility, I turned right and headed toward what looked to be the town center. The truck veered correctly, keeping the same exact distance. Now my hands were perspiring. With no street lights and only deserted streets and sleeping homes, the town was pitch black. I drove carefully in search of a public area with people and lights, but everything was closed for the evening. It dawned on me then that the truck's headlights were off. It was getting dark, but I could still see it in my mirror, a shadowy figure trailing me through the dozing town. There are no lights at everything. Who drives that way? Who pursues someone in the darkness in a strange town? As I walked through the deserted streets, my heart was pounding. The truck behind me felt like a burden on my chest, but it was unseen. I was holding my breath, wondering what I was waiting for. What did I anticipate happening? I reached another crossroads and halted at the sign, clutching the steering wheel with trembling hands. I could just make out the truck that was stopped behind me in my side mirror. It's still dark and quiet. We probably only sat there 4 seconds, but it felt like hours. The truck then started to back up slowly, still without lights. I watched in horror and interest as it turned around and vanished around a corner down the street from whence we had come. For 5 whole minutes, I waited by myself at that intersection, while listening to my own heartbeat. I drove back toward the highway at last, looking at every parked car and shadow, hoping to see that a shadowy figure is awaiting me. The truck has vanished. I arrived home just as the sun was rising. My hands strained from grasping the wheel, and my nerves went haywire. In the days that followed, I attempted to make sense of what had transpired. Perhaps the driver turned around after realizing they were lost. Perhaps they were residents of that town, and I had just followed them home. Perhaps there was a mechanical issue with the headlights. However, I was at a loss as to why they had switched off their lights. The deliberate timing of those high beam flashes was beyond my comprehension, and the sensation that something had been pursuing me along that pitch-black roadway persisted. Something that had followed me into that sleepy town. And when it realized I had left it in a useless place, it disappeared like smoke. 3 weeks later, Sarah, a co-worker, went pale as I was trying to make light of the incident. "What was this highway?" she inquired. She was silent for a while after I informed her. "Moment, my sister occasionally drives that route for work," she continued. "Late shifts. She has reported seeing a truck that follows people, maintains a constant distance, and flashes its lights constantly. She believes it is searching for a certain individual, or simply hunting, perhaps. What are you hunting for?" I could see the discomfort in Sarah's eyes even though she shrugged. She claims that it only occurs after 3 in the morning, although she is unsure, and it only tracks vehicles that have a single occupant. Vehicles driven by individuals who appear to be potential targets. I no longer drive at night, not after midnight, not on long highways, and most definitely not by yourself. I sometimes think about those headlights in my mirror while I'm lying in bed right before bed, and I wonder what would have occurred if I hadn't taken that exit. What would have occurred if I had stayed on the highway and let that truck to continue pursuing me into the dark, early morning hours. It flashes its lights every 3 minutes like a countdown, and occasionally I wonder whether it's still out there, following some other lone car, waiting for someone who won't be smart enough to turn off the highway, someone who will continue to drive directly into whatever darkness it may present. There is a rationale to the 3 a.m. rule. In that regard, my father was correct. After midnight, the world belongs to diverse people, each with their own goals, and some of them chase 4 things they'll never catch, but they never give up. They drive trucks with precisely timed high beams, regulars at the rest stop. Since I work as a freight driver, I am familiar with every truck stop, rest area, and 24-hour restaurants between Seattle and Denver. On trips like this, you establish routines. Favorite coffee shops, dependable, spotlessly clean restrooms, safe havens, and places to sleep for a few hours. One of such safe places used to be the Meadowbrook Rest Area off I-84 in eastern Oregon. It's not very fancy. It's a tiny parking lot with picnic tables, restrooms, and one of those non-reading tourist information kiosks. But it's clean, well lit, and mostly deserted, save for the odd family who stops to let their children run around. You may park your RV there, get some rest, and not have to worrying about anyone disturbing you. Sometime in the late summer, I became aware of the pattern. The same 3 cars were usually present when I stopped at Meadowbrook for my regular nighttime runs, which always take place between midnight and morning. A little grey hatchback, a dark pickup truck, and a white vehicle with Washington license plates. The same 3 cars are always in the same positions in the lot. I didn't give it much thought at first. They might have been local night workers or commuters who carpooled from there. However, after watching them 4 times, I began to pay more attention. Every time, the cars were vacant. There are no individuals in sight, not at the picnic, not in the restrooms tables, as opposed to moving around and extending their legs like other tourists do. Every night in the midst of nowhere, 3 empty cars sit in a rest area. On my 5th visit, I made the decision to look around. After parking my rig at the far end of the lot, I went to have a better look. The white automobile seemed as though it had been sitting there 4 days, because of the thick coating of dust covering it. There was something on the dashboard of the pickup truck, but the windows were so darkly tinted that I couldn't see inside. They appeared to be documents or even pictures. The parking permit for long-term airport parking was dangling from the rearview mirror of the grey hatchback. I was trying to read the dates on that permit when I heard footsteps on gravel in the background. "Are you trying to find something?" When I turned back, I saw a medium-height man in pants and a plaid shirt approaching me from the direction of the facilities. There was nothing overtly menacing about him. I stepped back from the hatchback, though, because of something in his tone. I said, just stretching my legs, which was accurate enough. "Road trip, long night." Although he nodded, his gaze remained fixed on mine. "Yes, it's a suitable location for it. Silent, secluded. Few individuals are aware of this location." He accentuated that last part in a way that seemed strange, as if keeping the rest place a secret was crucial, as if he were cautioning me against telling anyone about it. I said, "Well, I should get going," as I started to back up to my truck. "Got to make Denver by morning. Drive carefully," he said. However, he remained still. He merely observed me as I made my way back to my rig, and until I got into the cab and turned on the engine. I could feel his gaze on me. The automobiles were usually there when I drove past Meadowbrook, but I didn't sleep there that night or the following time I went through. In the fluorescent light of the lot security lights, the identical grey hatchback, white sedan, and black pickup was sitting empty. A few weeks later, I heard the state highway employees conversing at the next table as I was having dinner at a truck stop about 50 miles down the road. They had been receiving complaints about abandoned cars in the rest area, so one of them brought up Meadowbrook. "Week after week, the same 3 cars just sit there," the older one said. "When we contact, none of them report the automobiles as stolen, even though the DMV claims they are all registered to different individuals. The most peculiar part is that one of the owners claims to have sold the automobile months ago, but he can't recall who said the buyer paid cash and he misplaced the documentation. How about the other 2? One claims that her automobile is in her own driveway. Doesn't know what we're discussing. 3 weeks have passed since the other guy last picked up his phone. According to the neighbors, he's simply up and vanished one day. He took nothing with him when he left his residence." A shiver went down my back. Something told me to say nothing, even though I wanted to ask them more questions. Rather, I drained my coffee and obtained I was back on the road with a lot of unwelcome thoughts running through my head. I was going to drive right through without stopping the next time I had to make that errand. However, I had to pull over at roughly 2 a.m. due to a tire blowout, and the only safe location within 20 meters to fix it was Meadowbrook. There was nothing I could do. As usual, the 3 automobiles were present. This time, however, while fumbling with the spare tire, I became aware of something I had previously overlooked. The trunk of the white car had a little break in it, as if it hadn't been securely fastened. Additionally, there was a subtle yet distinct odor in the air, like flowers left in water for too long. It's sweet and nasty. Without stopping to arrange my tools, I threw everything back into the truck and changed the tire faster than I had ever changed a tire in my life. I heard automobile doors banging as I was tightening the final lug nuts, 3 in fast succession, not one. From the direction of the 3 parked cars, I could see individuals walking toward the toilet building. I looked up. The faint light made it impossible to see their faces, but there was something off about the way they moved. They were moving too slowly and synchronized, as if they were all following the same quiet beat. I didn't wait to find out their identity or their desires. With trembling hands, I changed through the gears and tossed my flat tire in the back of the truck before leaving. 3 individuals were watching me go from the parking lot in my side mirror. 6 months have passed since then. Since then, I've modified my itinerary, despite the fact that it takes an additional hour to drive time and expenses fuel and money. I rationalize that it's either because of the poor road conditions close to Meadowbrook or because I discovered nicer truck stops on the other route. In actuality, though, I can't get those empty cars out of my head. nor the people that get out of them in the middle of the night. I occasionally glimpse a rest stop in my headlights while traveling through other states on other routes, and I spot cars in the parking lot that appear to spotless and well positioned. And even if my logbook tells me to stop and relax, I'll remember that wonderful, rotting smell and continue to drive. Due to I've discovered that some locations aren't appropriate for tourists like me. Some locations are set aside for those with nowhere else to go, those who manage to establish a permanent residence along the road. Additionally, they may encourage you to accompany them on endless journeys and in automobiles that never depart if you're not careful. Never depart if you're not careful. The lane for carpooling during those days, I worked late shifts at the hospital, leaving at 2 a.m. and had to make the hour-long drive home via the mountains. At that time of night, Highway 9 was always deserted, but for me and the occasional trucker navigating the twisting canyon roads. In fact, it was quiet, just the rhythm of the curves and the yellow lines fading under my headlights. No tension, no traffic. I never understood the purpose of the carpool lane on that section of roadway, through the most barren area of the canyon, where you might see 3 cars in a single night. It went for roughly 15 miles. Out there, who did they expect to carpool? I had developed the habit of utilizing it, because no one was ever there to notice, yet it was there, isolated by those plastic barriers. I saw the hitchhiker for the first time that way. Perhaps 20 years old, she stood on the shoulder, just before the carpool lane started. Her light jacket seems insufficient for the alpine cold. Pale complexion that nearly gleamed in my headlights and long, dark hair. As I walked up to her, she was staring at me with her thumb out. I reduced my speed and considered stopping. Something stopped me, even though it was risky for someone to be out there by themselves at that hour. Perhaps it has to do with her posture. Also, to straight. The majority of hitchhikers move, change their weight, and exhibit some life outside of that outstretched thumb, with the exception of her eyes, which followed my car as I went by. She remained completely still, like a statue. She was still standing there, watching my tail lights go out around the bend, when I caught a glimpse of her in my rearview mirror. She was at the same place the following evening. The identical clothes, the same awkwardly motionless posture, the exact same position. This time, I was certain that I would pull over, assist her, and perhaps offer to call someone in the next town. However, when I reduced my speed, I became aware of something that compelled me to accelerate instead. She was grinning. It was a smile that was very different from a friendly wave down an automobile. Something too broad, too shrewd. Like if she had been waiting for me in particular. As like we had a hidden joke that only she knew. I passed again, more quickly this time, and didn't check my mirror until I had gone around the next bend. By the third night, I had changed my course. I had to drive an additional half-hour home simply to avoid that section of the highway. However, my supervisor altered my schedule, and by 2 a.m., I was back on Highway 9, getting closer to the location where the carpool lane started. Naturally, she was present, but she wasn't by herself this time. About 10 feet behind her, a man who was also hitchhiking stood motionless, the same awkward stance, the same strained gaze. Additionally, behind him, little discernible in I could make out what might have been a third figure in the darkness outside the range of my headlights. I didn't slow down. I never gave it a thought. However, as I passed them, I noticed something in my side mirror that chilled me to the bone. The woman had entered the lane designated for carpooling. She was following me, like she was being dragged by an unseen rope, as she walked down the middle of it at precisely the same speed as my automobile. I accelerated. She accelerated as well. I'm still walking and keeping a precise distance from my car. I could see her arms flailing mechanically in my mirror. She cocked her head in the direction of my tail lights. Before I lost sight of her around a tight curve, she followed me for about a mile. I called in ill for the remainder of the week. Once I got home that evening, I required some time to reflect and persuade myself that I had envisioned the entire scenario. Perhaps too many double shifts had been on my schedule. Perhaps my eyes were deceiving me, because of the twisting roads and the mountain air. However, they were all still there when I drove same road again the following Monday, when I eventually went back to work. The man, the woman, and now the third figure was in full view. This older woman was dressed in what appeared to be a nurse's costume from about 2 decades ago. They were all three at the start of the carpool lane, all motionless, all keeping that same predatory patience while observing the road. I began making informal inquiries regarding Highway 9 at work, such as weather on the late night drives. Has anyone else seen anything out of the ordinary? The majority simply shrug and claim to reside in town or take the highway home. However, something Jenny said in the emergency room made me shudder. You mean the people who pick you up? Without raising her gaze from her charts, she said. They have indeed been there for many years. When my husband worked nights at the plant, he used to see them. In winter, he usually claimed, there were more of them, like in the snow. They waited for someone to slip off the road. He referred to them as pick-up folks, claimed that although they appeared to be hitchhiking, they never entered a vehicle. Night after night, they simply stood there as if they were anticipating a certain event. After a moment, she looked up at me. Why? You don't intend to pause for them, do you? Her remark stuck with me, even after I told her I wasn't waiting for a certain thing. Out there, what would they be waiting for? Night after night, mile after mile. I discovered that I was driving home later than usual 2 weeks later. I had been up till nearly 3 in the morning due to a patient emergency. Additionally, I noticed that the 3 figures had relocated as I got closer to the start of the carpool lane. Rather than on the shoulder, they were dispersed throughout both highway lanes, totally obstructing traffic. I had to halt. They could not be avoided. The woman in front of me, the first I'd seen with the broad smile, started to move toward my driver's side window as my car came to a stop. The man and the older woman stood behind her, one on either side of my automobile. They moved as if they had practiced this identical situation hundreds of times, with the same mechanical accuracy. The woman came to my window and used one finger to tap on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythmic sound that is patient, that seemed to reverberate throughout the surrounding canyon. She leaned closer and I saw her face fully for the first time when I didn't roll down the window. She had an entirely normal appearance. Somehow, that was the scariest thing of all. There are no overt indications of mental disease, injuries, or discomfort. She might have been a friend, sister, or daughter to anyone. However, there was something in her eyes that caused me to clutch the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She gave a mouthful. Through the glass, I could see her lips, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. We have been anticipating your arrival. As the 3 figures in my headlights got smaller, I slammed the car in reverse and backed up as quickly as I could on that winding mountain road, my pulse thumping. I took the long way home, turning around at the first open place and avoiding the thought of what might have happened if I had rolled down that window. The following week, I applied for a transfer to a different department's day shift. I explained to my boss that it was for personal reasons, and it was accurate enough. Those late night drives were becoming too much for me. There was no chance of running into the folks who were waiting in the carpool lane again. However, I now realize that some folks aren't looking for rides to certain locations. So occasionally, while I'm driving on well-traveled roads during regular business hours, I'll notice a hitchhiker on the shoulder and get that familiar chill. All they're searching for is the ideal opportunity to stop someone who is too far away from assistance, alone and vulnerable. And I wonder if many other routes have their own rendition of the truck drivers that wait for their particular thing to finally appear, while standing motionless and patient in lonely spots. Motionless and patient in lonely spots. The absence of an exit for 12 years. I have been traveling the same route between Phoenix and Flagstaff ever since I established my northern sales territory, Highway 17 across the desert. It was a straight shot I could make while I slept. My recollection of innumerable journeys is etched with each mile marker, rest area, every exit. I therefore realized right away that something was off when I saw the exit 251 sign that October evening. On I-17, exit 251 does not exist. As far as I can recall, the roadway jumps from exit 248 to exit 252. It's one of those peculiarities you notice when you consistently travel the same path. A sequence with a missing number, most likely a long-standing planning error that was never fixed. But about 1:30 a.m., I noticed a green, official-looking highway sign in my headlights that stated, Exit 251, Copper Ridge, 1 mile. I believed I knew every small desert hamlet along this route, but I had never heard of a place called Copper Ridge. However, road signs don't emerge all at once. I reasoned that perhaps they had finally constructed something on that vacant plot of land, perhaps a little subdivision or a truck stop that I had somehow overlooked throughout my daily runs. The exit appeared just as the sign said, a typical off-ramp that curved into the night. What seemed strange to me, though, was how brand new everything appeared. The asphalt was flawless, no weather damage or cracks. Additionally, the lane markers' reflective paint was so brilliant that nearly painful to look at, as if everything had been put in yesterday. I thought I would drive a mile or two to see what this Copper Ridge area was about and, if there was anything open, maybe grab a coffee, because I was intrigued enough to take the exit. After exiting the off-ramp, a 2-lane road proceeded directly into what appeared to be ordinary desert scrub area. However, the road itself was just as flawless as the departure ramp. I arrived at what looked to be a little town about a mile down the road. The road was lined with street lights on both sides, which illuminated the well-kept buildings and tidy sidewalks. There were many stores, a cafe, a petrol station, and even what appeared to be a tiny motel. Everything you might anticipate from a highway town in the desert, with one exception. It was totally deserted, not shut off for the evening, empty. Actually, it's empty. There were pumps at the petrol station, but no pricing signs, no corporate emblems. There was nothing to suggest the brand it should have been. There were no menus displayed, but tables were visible through the windows of the diner. There were no signage stating the operating hours. There was a vacancy sign at the motel, but it was only a prop that was not illuminated. In search of any clue that this was a real place with actual people living and working there, I drove slowly down the main street. However, the quality of each building I passed was identical to that of the road signs, too new, too flawless, like a movie set, but without all the little touches that would give it a realistic appearance. The road just stopped at the end of the major street. No turnabout, no continuation, and no return to the highway. There was nothing more than a dead end at the edge of the desert, indicated by a lone street light that created a yellow puddle of light on the asphalt. I became anxious at that point. I drove again through the town after turning around, paying more attention to the structures. Although the windows of the gas station were dark, I could make out features inside, including the contour of shelves and what appeared to be a counter. One of the booths in the diner was occupied. I pulled over in the middle of the road and looked out the window of the diner. There was undoubtedly someone waiting for something in a corner booth, sitting still and facing away from me, or simply sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning in a restaurant that is closed in a town that shouldn't exist. Then I ought to have gone. I should have acted as though I had never noticed exit 251 and driven directly back to the freeway. But I was drawn to the figure at the diner for some reason. They appeared to have been placed in that booth, rather than sitting down on their own, since they were so motionless and arranged so precisely. I exited my vehicle and made my way to the front entrance of the diner. It had been unlocked. The interior was as typical of a diner in a small town. A coffee maker, a counter with stalls, red vinyl booze, and a piece. Everything was as usual, save for the total lack of any noises, odors, or indications that food had ever been cooked there. An old man with a baseball cap and flannel shirt occupied the corner booth. When I walked in, he didn't even recognize me, let alone look up. His hands were folded, his breathing so shallow I could hardly hear it, and he was staring at something on the table in front of him. I said, "Pardon me, My voice seemed abnormally loud in the quiet. "Is this location open?" He didn't answer, didn't appear to hear me at all. I moved in to see what he was staring at. There was a road map on the table, but it wasn't your typical one. This one displayed a network of connected lines with numbers, but no cities or landmarks, just freeways. And someone had drawn a design I couldn't quite make out by marking certain routes with red pen. I reached out to touch his shoulder again. "Sir." His head sprang up to meet mine as soon as my fingers touched him. His brown, attentive, and focused eyes were perfectly normal. But I took a step back because of something in his face. Nor fear, nor animosity, just a sort of knowing recognition, as if he had been waiting for me in particular. "You took the exit," he replied in a papery, dry voice. "Most people don't take the exit." "What exit? What is this place?" His smile fell short of his eyes. Population variable Copper Ridge was established whenever someone needed it. He indicated the map. "From here, you can see every route, all the entrances, all the exits." Very instructive. I took another look at the map, and I could see what the red marks meant this time. They weren't arbitrary. The ramps were exits. There were many of them marked on roads I knew in several different states, and dates and timings were written beside each mark in tiny handwriting. I murmured as I retreated toward the door, "I need to get back to the highway. I have to get to Flagstaff tonight." "Of course you do." With methodical and exact movements, he folded the map with care. "Everybody who comes here has to go somewhere. The exit appears when it does for this reason. Late at night, when someone is driving alone and intent on getting where they're going, when they aren't closely observing which exits ought to be present." Now I was standing at the door, my hand on the handle. "What are you discussing?" he continued, getting slowly to his feet. "Copper Ridge has a very specific purpose. We assist anyone who may be lost. People who enter locations they never meant to go and take exits that shouldn't be there. We offer them time to reflect about their ultimate goals." I hurried back to my car, starting the engine before I had even shut the door, and sped as fast as I could through that impossibly fast-paced town in the direction of the on-ramp. However, there was nothing when I got to the end of the road where it rejoined the highway. There is nothing but desert in every direction. I-17 is nowhere to be seen. There was no way to go back the way I knew. As the dawn rose, I sat in my car, trying to make sense of what had transpired. Eventually, another automobile drew up next to me, and I noticed headlights in the distance. The driver's window was rolled down. A middle-aged woman who appeared just as bewildered and terrified as I was. She inquired, "Is this Copper Ridge?" I was on my way to Denver by car. Took a route that wasn't supposed to be taken. I can't find the roadway anymore. We attempted to make sense of it all by comparing our stories. On the I-7, she had spotted exit 147, which was not on our usual route. The same elderly man in the same cafe with the same map displaying the exits that appeared. The same spotless road leading to the same deserted town. And the same flawless signs when they weren't sought after. By midday, there were 6 of us, and we all shared experiences about unfamiliar exits on roads we believed to be familiar. As we explored Copper Ridge throughout the day, we discovered additional proof that it was built with us in mind. Individuals who had made incorrect turns on roadways that shouldn't have been used. No one remembered checking in, but the motel had rooms ready. Fuel was available at the gas station. However, there was no fee for the pumps. We never saw who prepared the food, but it was served at the diner whenever someone was hungry. Every night, the elderly man holding the map went back to his booth to wait for the next perplexed motorist to enter and inquire about returning to the highway. 3 months have passed since then. I've given up trying to get out of Copper Ridge and have given up trying to find a way back to I-17. Other drivers arrive and depart. After a few days, some manage to escape. New ones always come to replace those that stay longer. We can depart, the elderly man says, whenever we'd want, that when we're ready to see it, the exit leading back to our original routes will show up. However, I'm beginning to believe that some of us are reluctant to go. Some of us like this area, since it has unruly highways and exits that can appear when you need them most. After all, It's preferable to get lost somewhere with hot coffee and clean accommodations if you're going to get lost. People who are lost know what it's like to take the wrong turn and wind up exactly where you didn't want to be. The broadcast of emergency throughout the week. The radio had been malfunctioning, intermittently cutting out as I was driving between Sacramento and Reno at midnight. I kept meaning to have it fixed, but I didn't have much time for it because of my late night warehouse duties, upkeep, when I hit the correct position on Highway 80. I usually only had to contend with the static and the occasional flash of clear signal. The radio sprang to life with exceptional clarity about an hour into the drive that Thursday night in November. I heard the familiar tone that comes before an emergency announcement instead of the classic rock station had been half listening to. Then a computerized voice, followed by 3 piercing beeps. There is an emergency alert. There's been a complaint of a hazardous person on Interstate 80 between mile markers 135 and 142. Description of the vehicle: dark sedan, possibly black or blue. The driver should not be confronted because they are regarded as being exceedingly hazardous. Do not stop if you see this car. Avoid making eye contact and head straight for the closest inhabited place. I felt sick to my stomach. I looked at my speedometer. My odometer indicated that I was almost at mile marker 138, which is the dead center of the danger zone. It was the first time I had ever heard such an emergency broadcast. They typically provide warnings about bad weather or missing kids rather than identifying dangerous individuals on certain route segments. However, I was by myself on a pitch-black road in the middle of nowhere, and the synthetic voice seemed quite official. I choose to be serious about it. Maybe half a mile back, I noticed spotlights in my rearview mirror, steady while maintaining my speed. Dark vehicle. In the darkness, it's difficult to identify the hue, perhaps the sedan that they had forewarned of, or it might be anybody. I increased my speed a little and kept an eye on the other vehicle to see if it would catch up. Yes, it did. Once more, the radio crackled, but the message was different. An update on the incident on Interstate 80. It has now been established that the hazardous person is pursuing a white pickup truck. Do not stop your car. White pickup truck driver. If you are listening, law enforcement is waiting at the fax exit. Mile marker 145, so proceed right away. I had planned to stop for gas at the fax exit, and I was driving a white pickup truck. As I comprehended what I had just heard, my fists gripped the driving wheel more tightly. Either someone was observing me and broadcasting instructions just for me, or this was just a crazy coincidence. However, who would do that? Furthermore, how would they be able to determine the type of car I was operating? I took another glance in my mirror. The black sedan remained, perhaps a bit nearer now. The way the automobile moved steadily to intently made my skin crawl. Even though I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windshield, static buzzed on the radio, then cleared. For the driver of the white pickup truck on Interstate 80. This is an essential update. It has been determined that the person who is following you has a history of acting violently toward lone drivers. Don't try to confront this individual. Continue driving at your current pace and head for the Colfax exit. There will be assistance soon. I was obviously the intended recipient of that message. There is no doubt about that. However, how could they be so aware of my particular circumstance? Unless there was someone keeping an eye on everything, tracking both cars, and keeping an eye on events in real time. There was no signal as I reached for my cell phone to dial 911. I was presumably in one of the dead zones that the mountains around this section of roadway generated. My sole means of communication with the outside world was the radio, which warned me that I was being pursued by a dangerous individual. The 140th mile marker flashed by my window. Help was meant to be waiting at the Colfax exit, 5 more miles away. As I depressed the accelerator, I saw my speed increase to 75 and then 80 miles per hour. The dark vehicle easily kept pace in my mirror. The white pickup truck's final makeover. You are now 3 miles from safety, the radio said. The person behind you has sped up and might try to push you off the road. Do not permit this to occur. In the event that you need more help, drive past the fax exit and proceed to Auburn. Perhaps the vehicle widths behind me. The automobile was now unquestionably closer. My headlights' reflection from the road signs made it easier for me to see. It appeared to be a black or dark blue four-door. There's nothing very special about it. However, the smoothness of its motion, as if it were being operated by a highly skilled individual, following people on dark roadways, was unnerving. Almost to the exit, mile markers 142 and 143 came into view in my headlights. Up ahead, I could make out the fax off-ramp, and sure enough, I could see flashing lights at the bottom of the exit. Police cars, as promised on the radio, but the radio crackled again as I got closer to the off-ramp. This is your last warning. White pickup. Avoid using the fax exit. There are no law enforcement officers waiting there. It's a trap. Proceed to Auburn on Interstate 80. At Auburn, genuine assistance is waiting. When I had to make a choice, I was traveling at 80 miles per hour and perhaps a quarter of a mile from the exit. The red and blue flashing lights, which were positioned like police cars, appeared to be real. However, the radio informed me that it was a trap and that the actual threat was at the bottom of that off-ramp. On the roadway, I stayed. I felt my blood chill when I looked down at the flashing lights as I passed the fax exit. They weren't even police cars. From a distance, the ordinary cars with emergency flashes were positioned to resemble law enforcement. Between the automobiles, I could make out figures watching the highway, waiting for someone to fall for the ruse. The dark vehicle didn't slow down as it followed me past the exit. The radio thought it was a good choice, and it wasn't the automated voice for the first time. It was a male human voice conversing if we were having a typical discussion. Auburn is still 15 miles in front. You're doing all right. Continue driving. I became aware of the true situation at that point. The bogus police cars at fax, the radio broadcasts, the automobile that was following me. Everything was planned, including a complex setup with many actors playing various parts, all aimed at making sure I did precisely what I was supposed to do: drive alone at night toward a prearranged destination. However, why? What did Auburn have in store for me? How many individuals participated in this operation? I'm sure you're wondering what all of this is about. The radio voice went on. If he could read my mind. Don't stress over that. Just concentrate on driving. There is a good truck stop in Auburn that is open all night. Excellent coffee and spotless restrooms. There, you'll enjoy yourself. I wanted to go back in the direction of Sacramento. However, the vehicle remained behind me, and there was no assurance that the fax staff hadn't taken action to block alternative exits. It appeared like my only option was to continue driving in the direction of Auburn and hope that whatever was there would be preferable to what I had left behind. The radio voice continued to speak informally and amiably, informing me about the Auburn truck stop, the other truckers that pulled over, and how it was a convenient location for individuals like me to rest and refuel. However, there was more going on behind the cordial tone, a feeling of possession, as though he was pointing me in the direction of something that was his. Auburn was never my destination. I noticed a state police cruiser, genuine one this time, pulling over on the shoulder, with its emergency lights on about 5 miles before the exit. Shaking, I got out of my truck and slammed on my brakes to pull over behind it. When the police saw me, he was truly shocked, claimed that he had not heard of any hazardous people on Interstate 80, and that he had been dealing with a minor fender incident. He appeared worried, but perplexed when I explained the radio broadcasts and the sedan that was after me. The dark vehicle was nowhere to be seen as we headed back down the highway, disappeared as if it had never been there. I was taken to the Auburn truck stop by the officer, but it was a typical location, just weary drivers receiving coffee and gasoline, with no indications of complex setups or well-planned activities. I never understood the true purpose of those radio broadcasts, or who was behind them. But that night, I discovered something significant. When, even if it seems official, you can't trust anything you hear when you're driving alone on dark highways. even when it appears to be intended to assist you, because sometimes you need to get away from the people who are attempting to save you. Furthermore, until you achieve true safety on your own terms, it may be necessary to continue driving past all the exits that offer assistance. The game of mile markers on the way back from her grandmother's burial. My daughter Emma initiated the mile marker game. She was 8 years old and attempting to divert her attention from the lengthy drive by using her tablet and coloring books while seated in the rear seat. Ahead, I had thought that she would go to sleep, but it was past midnight. However, grief has a way of keeping anyone, including kids, up at night. She said, "Dad, let's play a game," her tiny voice piercing the engine's hum. "I'll share a memory of Granny with you each time we cross a mile marker." It seemed like a kind way to pay tribute to her grandmother. I therefore concurred. Mile signs appeared in our headlights every few minutes like clockwork. We traveled the unending Highway 287 into Wyoming. Mile 134. Grandma always let me eat the dough from her delicious chocolate chip cookies. Mile 135. She let me to wind up the old music box she had with the dancing lady, even though I wasn't permitted to touch it. Mile 136. Do you recall her humming while she prepared food? She didn't know the words to the song. As you might expect from a child discussing a cherished grandmother, the recollections were vivid, lovely, innocent and reassuring. However, as the miles passed, Emma's memories started to change in character. Mile 142. According to Grandma, there were nighttime highway watchers who made sure everyone arrived at their destination. I took a look at the rearview mirror. "What are you saying, my love? They have special jobs like crossing guards, but for adults driving cars," she said. "They ensured that no one got lost or ended up in inappropriate locations." Mile 143. Grandma was familiar with their names. According to her, they were excellent at what they did and took great care to ensure everyone's safety. That was strange. Emma's grandma was a retired librarian, so she was unlikely to be familiar with traffic control or highway police. However, grief alters memory in peculiar ways, causes people to recall discussions that may not have occurred as they believe. Mile 145. If we ever got lost while driving at night, she advised me to find the assistants. They are constantly observing, yet they dress normally to avoid frightening people. When did your grandmother tell you all of this, Emma? You went grocery shopping last week, in case something happened to her, and we had to drive home alone. She stated it was crucial that I know. A shiver went through my body. Emma's grandma had spent much of her time in hospice care, hardly conscious. It seemed doubtful, but not impossible, that she and Emma had discussed traffic safety in a clear and concise manner. Mile 148. According to Grandma, the caregivers occasionally follow families to make sure they arrive home all right. She advised me not to panic if I noticed the same automobile following us for an extended period of time, since they are merely carrying out their duties. I felt my stomach clench. I looked in my mirrors. For the final 20 meters, a set of headlights had been following us, keeping the same distance and precisely matching my speed. Though I hadn't given it much thought, I had noticed them. On lengthy highway segments, such as mile 150, people traveled the same routes and maintained comparable speeds. According to her, the aides have a unique manner of announcing their presence. In a pattern like to a code, they flashed their lights. The headlights behind us flashed once, twice, then 3 times in rapid succession, as though Emma's words had called them forth. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Dad, did you see that? They're greeting each other." It scared me when I saw it. Me. Emma was 8 years old. She couldn't possibly have planned this. She couldn't have planned for a car to follow us and turn on its lights at the perfect time. Even more disturbing was the possibility that her dead grandmother had somehow prepared her for this very circumstance. Mile 153. According to Grandma, the aides are aware of the residences and travel routes of the families. To ensure they can assist people more effectively, they conduct research on them. Behind us, the automobile was drawing nearer. Now I could see it better. The license plate was too far away to read clearly on a dark SUV with tinted windows. The driver was mechanically following our itinerary, and they knew exactly where they were going. Mile 155. She informed me that in order to make sure everything is all right, the helpers occasionally need to speak with families. She advised me to be really courteous and respond to all of their inquiries if they ever wanted to speak with us. Emma, please pay attention to very carefully, I responded, attempting to seem composed. I want you to wear your seat belt and remain in your seat if we stop the car for any reason tonight. Stay inside. Refrain from rolling down your window. Don't speak to anybody but me. Are you able to do that? They're merely trying to help, Dad. Grandma gave a detailed explanation. Mile 157. According to her, the assistants operate in groups, and occasionally there are more than one. They're really patient and well organized, she remarked. I noticed another set of headlights pulled off on the shoulder ahead of us as we passed mile marker 157. The car got out as we got closer and started to move ahead of us at the same speed as us. We were now positioned between two cars that were moving with the same careful coordination and keeping ideal distances. Mile 159. According to Grandma, the caregivers prefer to meet families in peaceful settings where they may converse without being interrupted. They know all the best spots, she remarked. Ahead, I noticed a sign. 2 miles of rest area. The ideal setting for a private talk that no one else could hear. The vehicle ahead of us activated its turn signal, signaling that it intended to pull over there. I informed Emma, we're not stopping at the rest area, as I pushed the throttle to overtake the leading vehicle. However, the SUV behind us also accelerated. Abruptly, I found myself confined, unable to alter lanes or accelerate. Mile 161. According to Grandma, the helpers are constantly aware of when someone will require their assistance. According to her, they are able to predict when a family is going through a trying moment and are ready to assist. The exit to the rest area was rapidly approaching. I had to slow down since the automobile in front of us was slowing down. I could see the SUV approaching in my rearview mirror, leaving me with no space to move. What specifically did Grandma tell you, Emma, about these assistants? According to her, they assist those who have no one else to care for them, such as households where an adult passes away or where children require new housing. My blood became icy. Emma had lost her grandmother. I had no close family nearby and was a single father. Emma would definitely be a youngster in need of care if something were to happen to me on this pitch-black roadway. Tires screaming, I struggled to keep control. I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the right and exited the rest area sooner than I should have. I would like to have a confrontation on my own terms rather than being coerced into one, as these folks desired one. With the exception of a few semi-trucks parked at the far end, the rest area was deserted. In the brightest light I could locate, I pulled into a position next to the facilities and waited to see what would happen. The SUV parked on my other side, and the lead car came up behind me. There was nothing for a few minutes. I didn't know what we were waiting for, but we all simply sat there in our cars like that. Emma then resumed her speech. Grandma said, I should tell you she's sorry, in her final message. What am I sorry about, dear? For arranging things without first consulting you. She stated, you're a good dad, but that sometimes good isn't enough to keep people safe. She assured me that no matter what, the helpers would make sure I had someone to look after me. The other cars began opening their doors. As Emma had mentioned, a guy and a woman in their 40s, both dressed normally, exited the lead automobile. Another older man with a jacket that seemed to be concealing something emerged from the SUV. They approached our automobile with the composed assurance of those who have done this countless times, those who were unconcerned about opposition and knew exactly what they were doing. The SUV had moved to obstruct my escape when I turned on the engine and backed out of the parking spot. Knowing I had nowhere to run, the three continued to approach us slowly. A quiet "it's okay, Dad," Emma said. Grandma stated that they are quite pleasant after you get to know them. She claimed that there is a place where children like me can live in happiness and safety, free from harm. I noticed something in my daughter's eyes that I had never seen before when I looked at her in the rearview mirror. There was a sense of anticipating calm, as if she were waiting for something that had been promised, rather than panic or bewilderment. The people had now nearly reached our car. What was going to happen, I knew, had been prearranged long before tonight by a dying lady who believed she was shielding her grandchild from an uncertain future. I was going to find out if she was correct or not. The night shift, I needed the money and didn't mind working alone, so I accepted the nightly security position at the Highway 6-way station. For what appeared to be simple labor, the remuneration was respectable. From 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., simply remain in the booth, check in any vehicles that arrived, and ensure that no one is exploiting the closed facility for any improper purposes. On my first night, Martinez, the day shift supervisor, gave me a rudimentary orientation. Easy enough. Trucks arrive. I wave them through after reviewing their weight certificates and logs. I'd see maybe a dozen trucks total most nights, he added. I could read, watch movies on my laptop, or do anything else I wanted for the remainder of the day. However, as he prepared to depart, Martinez remarked, "You'll probably notice some regulars. Every night, the same trucks arrive at the same times. Don't stress over it. Certain drivers are habitual." Pointing to a clipboard on the wall, he said, "I like to keep exact schedules. Simply log each person who enters. Time out and time in. The state enjoys monitoring traffic trends." The job was just as advertised for the first week. Calm yet dull. Every night, I would observe 8 to 10 trucks, most of which had different drivers transporting different kinds of cargo between cities. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that needed more than a friendly wave and a cursory glance at their paperwork. Regarding the regulars, however, Martinez was correct. I began to see a pattern by the second week. Every night, within a 15-minute interval of the same time, the same 5 trucks arrived. A white Freightliner at 3:10 a.m., a blue Kenworth at 2:45 a.m., and a red Peterbilt at 1:20 a.m., a green Volvo at 5:50 a.m., and a black Mack truck at 4:35 a.m. Dean gets the same trucks. Every night, the same drivers, the same times. I initially assumed it was a coincidence, or perhaps these people were on strict schedules due to their regular routes. However, after witnessing the identical process for 2 weeks, I began to pay more attention to their documentation. At that moment, I became aware of something odd. Although each of the 5 vehicles was purportedly transporting distinct cargo to various locations, their weight certificates were exactly the same. Night after night, the weights are exactly the same for entirely different cargo. One morning, when Martinez came in to relieve me, I told him about it. He dismissed it. Most likely clerical mistakes. These individuals handle a great volume of paperwork. They may grab the incorrect forms. We don't care about small discrepancies, as long as the state dot numbers match. However, I found it bothersome. For 3 weeks in a row, 5 different trucks delivered the same weights to various places every night. It was not a clerical mistake. Either it was a remarkable coincidence, or it was something more. During their stops, I began to ask the drivers informal questions. Where were they going? What were they transporting? They had been running this course for how long? The responses were consistently entirely logical. Car parts to Denver, electronics to Portland, furniture to Salt Lake City, and other standard cargo for everyday company needs. However, it seemed as though they had prepared their answers in advance. Having been asked these questions numerous times, they knew exactly how to tell their story. Furthermore, none of them appeared shocked that I was inquiring, as if they had anticipated that someone would ultimately become interested in their routine. In the 4th week of my employment, the breakthrough occurred. The Scarlett Curtis, the slender Peterbilt driver, who usually wore the same John Deere cap, was roughly 10 minutes late. He appeared agitated as he came up to my booth, constantly checking his watch and peering in his mirrors. Everything okay? As I studied his logbook, I inquired. Yeah, we're just running late tonight. Experienced a few hold-ups at the pickup location. My skin crawled when he said something after pausing. I'm sure people are wondering where I am. The others, as though they were coordinating their motions and communicating with one another, as if this was some sort of planned convoy rather than 5 separate drivers making separate drives. After giving him his paperwork back and watching him drive off, I called our parent company's night dispatcher right away. I assumed they would have documentation of the actual cargo these trucks were transporting, perhaps a reason for the exact date and the same weights. The dispatcher was perplexed. No commercial cars were supposed to come by our way station that evening, based on his system. Because of the continuing construction on the access road, he continued, most major freight firms were intended to avoid our station. Are you certain that commercial traffic is present? Officially, that highway should be largely deserted after midnight, so he inquired. I was certain. For a month, I had been recording the same 5 trucks each night. However, the official documents state that they weren't intended to be. I made the decision to pay closer attention to etiquette the following evening. Curtis's papers was not the only thing I looked at when the red Peterbilt arrived at precisely 1:20 a.m. In fact, I studied it carefully and contrasted it with my computer state database. His truck's dot number belonged to a transportation company that had ceased operations 3 years prior. The license plate returned as being from a car that was reported to have been scrapped. The system did not even have his commercial driver's license number. As if it were the most commonplace thing in the world, he was sitting in a very real vehicle, giving me very real documentation and discussing his delivery schedule. As I put out my log entry, my hands were shaking, but I silently waved him through. What was Curtis actually doing coming past my way station every night, if he wasn't who he said he was, and if his truck wasn't legally registered? I went through all 5 normal driver's papers over the course of the following couple hours. No official database had any of them. Their trucks either returned as damaged vehicles or were registered to now defunct businesses. Their licenses were either invalid or belonged to deceased individuals. However, each night they arrived on time, smiling and professional, with loads that weighed precisely the same as all the other loads they had claimed to carry. There was no answer when I tried to reach Martinez at home. When I tried to reach the district supervisor, I received a voicemail. I was alone in a way station in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday night. I came to the realization that I had been processing ghost trucks driven by fictitious individuals. As usual, the black Mack truck arrived at 4:35 a.m. Dale, the heavy-set driver, was constantly carrying a thermos of coffee and frequently talked about the weather. All sports. He appeared to detect my uneasiness tonight. Son, are you all right tonight? You appear somewhat pallid. I took his paperwork without glancing at it and responded, just tired, long shift. Dale gave a sympathetic nod. Yes, evenings can be difficult, particularly if you start to think excessively. You know, you begin to think about things that you might be better off not asking. His voice had a tone that sounded like a soft warning. Implication that night shift security officers at remote way stations weren't always benefiting from curiosity. Dale went on to say that the good part about this work that it's easy. As the trucks arrive, you check them in and out. Nobody wants their queries addressed, so there's no reason to make matters more complicated. I sat in my booth, gazing at the clipboard where I had been recording the same 5 phantom drivers for a month, until he drove off. I had made up my mind by dawn. Along with my ID card and keys, I typed up a letter of resignation and placed it on Martinez's desk. I never followed up to find out what those 5 trucks were actually transporting, or who was paying them to drive fictional routes for long-dead businesses. But occasionally, I spot recognizable trucks in my rearview mirror when I'm driving late at night on the roadways close to that way station. A white Freightliner, a blue Kenworth, and a red Peterbilt. They appear to be following invisible timetables to invisible destinations, since they are consistently traveling the same distance and in the same order. And I wonder how many other people who work night shifts at distant sites have discovered the same thing I did. that some occupations pay well just because they make you forget what you're not allowed to notice and ask the right questions. The detour on GPS for 3 years. I'd been using the same GPS gadget without any issues. My car arrived with one of those entry-level models. It's nothing special, but it's dependable enough to carry me on numerous work trips throughout the Midwest. When it abruptly announced a detour on Highway 35 in rural Iowa that night, I didn't question it because I had entire faith in it. At 11:30 p.m., I drove into what seemed like the middle of nowhere and heard the familiar female voice say, "Take the exit right in 500 feet." I had driven the road dozens of times before on my way home from a client conference in Missouri, but I couldn't recall ever seeing an exit where the GPS was pointing me. However, routes shift, roads are built, and IT companies are always updating their maps. I assumed they had constructed new infrastructure since my last visit to the area, when I noticed the exit ramp appeared just where the GPS indicated it would be. Strange for a detour around interstate construction. The exit led to a two-lane county road that extended into countryside. Instead of taking you farther into the countryside, they typically take you through towns or onto parallel highways. However, the GPS appeared confident, displaying my course as a blue line that reunited with Highway 35, bending around an obstruction. 20 meters in front, it said, "Continue straight for 12 meters," and I prepared for what I figured would be a somewhat longer, but essential detour. Despite being well kept, the county road was deserted. Other than my headlights piercing the darkness, there was no other traffic or light. There were no indications of the construction that allegedly required this diversion. Farmhouses set well back from the road occasionally break up the unending cornfields on either side. I became apprehensive after 10 minutes or so of driving. I appeared on the GPS as a blue dot traveling the approved path, but something about the whole thing felt off. Before taking the exit, I attempted to remember if I had noticed any construction signs on Highway 35, but I was unable to do so. There was no mobile signal when I reached for my phone to check a different navigation app. That wasn't particularly concerning, because dead zones were typical in rural Iowa, but it did mean I couldn't confirm if this detour was real or if my GPS had broken down. The GPS said to turn left after 2 meters. I entered a narrower road after turning left. Just 2 cars could fit through this one. The pavement appeared to have been neglected 4 years because it was worn and cracked. It's definitely not the type of road used for formal detours by highway departments. When I saw lights up ahead, I began to slow down and considered turning around. It's the type of temporary lighting fixture you find at construction sites, not street lights or home lights. Floods were bright, shedding light on what appeared to be cars and equipment. The GPS indicated that you were getting close to your destination, even though I hadn't programmed anything else besides my home address. This route is still apparently 15 miles distant. I realized it wasn't a construction site at all when I approached the lights. It was a checkpoint of some sort. There were movable barriers, a few cars parked across the street, and a number of individuals wearing bright vests waiting around as if they were anticipating traffic. About 100 feet away, I paused to consider my options. Without a doubt, this was not a recognized highway detour. Turning around looked just as dangerous, even though highway departments don't place checkpoints on county roads in the middle of the night. They would have spotted my headlights by now if these folks were engaged in some sort of activity. With a torch in hand, one of the individuals wearing bright vests started to approach my car. With the nonchalant authority of someone accustomed to stopping cars, he moved. However, there was something off about his stance that easy, as if he didn't care about his personal security while standing in the middle of a pitch-black street. I decided quickly and put the car in reverse, backing up as quickly as I could on the small road. In my back, the individual stopped walking and turned back toward the others, as I could see in the view mirror. There was no shouting or frantic fleeing, just a composed return to the group, as if my retreat was normal and not especially worrisome. Before I could find a broad area to turn around, I drove backwards for perhaps a quarter of a mile. I discovered my GPS had stopped working. I was making my way back the direction I had come. There was no evidence that it was even receiving satellite signals, no blue line, and no path guiding. I began to worry that I had somehow made a mistake in my haste to leave the checkpoint, because the trip back to the county road seemed to take longer than it should have. However, I ultimately located the crossroads and made a right turn, returning to I was hoping it was Highway 35. As I got to the freeway on-ramp, my GPS briefly came back to life. It pleasantly informed that it had recalculated its route and had decided on a simple route home that showed no construction delays, detours, or barriers of any type. The remainder of the travel went smoothly, but I kept thinking about what I had seen. The roadblock had been too well planned and polished to be arbitrary. They had been prepared for drivers who knew they would be rerouted over that county road. After arriving home, I spent an hour looking up information on Highway 35 construction, road closures, and any other explanation for why my GPS had led me to an enigmatic checkpoint through fields. I discovered nothing. No planned detours, no construction notifications, and no justification for vehicles being diverted off the highway in that region. I inquired about the detour over the phone with the Iowa Department of Transportation the following day. My description perplexed the individual I spoke with, who reassured me that Highway 35 was not undergoing construction or undergoing any officially approved route alterations. As I explained this, she explained that the area where my GPS had told me to leave was notorious for having issues with illegal GPS spoofing. She clarified that it occurs when someone installs devices to transmit phony GPS signals, deceives your navigation system into suggesting routes that are useful to someone else, or makes it believe you are somewhere you are not. There have been accounts of it occurring in rural locations, generally targeting late-night lone truckers. She stated that was outside her area of expertise. When I asked what the objective would be, she advised you to notify the police about it. They keep tabs on that sort of thing. However, in part because I was unsure of what to report, I never did. I hadn't seen any obvious illegal conduct, hadn't been hurt, and hadn't even approached the checkpoint closely enough to observe what they were actually doing. Additionally, I was afraid of what I may discover if I began to ask too many questions. I switched to a newer GPS unit and began using my phone to navigate on lengthy journeys. It was merely a safeguard against antiquated technology, I remind myself. In actuality, though, I no longer rely on any one source for directions, because I now understand that we don't always choose the paths we take. People who have their own motives for wanting to meet us in locations when no one else will bother to look can occasionally lead us down dark paths. Additionally, there are instances when the technology we depend on to protect us actually puts us in danger, one step at a time, till we wind up in a place we never wanted to be, surrounded by those who had been anticipating us the entire time. The incorrect lane Interstate 70 had been in a construction zone 4 months, one of those seemingly never-ending highway projects. I was able to memorize the pattern by the time I was driving to see my mom every week in Colorado Springs. After the construction is finished, merge back, merge left, slow to 55, and remain in the single lane for roughly 15 miles. I was the sole vehicle on that section of road at roughly 1 a.m. on a Tuesday night in late October. On both sides of the lane were construction barriers, and orange reflectors formed a light tunnel that extended into the night. I had made many of trips through there by car. However, something felt different tonight. I saw a hole in the barricades on my right around 5 kilometers into the work area. It's not a formal opening. There was only an area where the orange barriers had been pushed aside, leaving a gap that was barely large enough for a car, and there was no signage or merging indicators. Through the opening, I could make out what appeared to be a parallel highway that ran beside the area under development. It had the same yellow lines and the same tarmac, but aside from what my headlights showed, it was absolutely dark and vacant. perhaps for emergency vehicles or construction workers. It appeared that they had constructed a detour through the construction site. I nearly accepted it. I was interested in the destination of this detour because the main lane was dull, but I was slowed down by something. Perhaps it's just habit. Perhaps a gut feeling advised me to follow the designated route. I proceeded in the main construction lane. After driving past the entrance, I noticed another gap in the barricades about 2 miles later, followed by another one. Every time, like a shadowy replica of the path, was following. I could see the identical parallel lane running beside me, empty and dark. I started to get nervous by the fourth gap. Multiple unmarked openings are uncommon in construction zones, particularly when they lead to entirely dark alternate paths. I attempted to recall whether I had noticed these gaps in my earlier journeys through the region, but I had always taken this route under better visibility during the day. I became aware of the automobile behind me at that point. After an hour of being alone on the interstate, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, possibly a half-mile behind me, and they were gradually catching up. That's nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't like the timing, although other folks drove this route at night. Just as I had begun to see the holes in the work barricades, the automobile had come into view. As we got closer to the next opening, I kept an eye on the headlights in my mirror. I was shocked when the vehicle behind me swerved into the space and vanished into the parallel lane. As it went by, I got a sight of it. It was a dark vehicle with tinted windows, traveling on the dark alternate route at the same speed as mine. Through holes in the barriers, I could see the headlights of the sedan, which was following me on the parallel lane for the next few miles. We were on different tracks, and I had no idea where the other track led, but it felt like we were racing. At the 267th mile marker, I had to slow down and pull over onto the small shoulder for some reason. Curiosity, perhaps. Perhaps I needed to make sense of what I was witnessing. After shutting off my engine, I listened to the quiet of the deserted highway. The sedan continued down the parallel path, and I could hear the roar of its engine through the construction barricades. But there was another sound I could hear. There were several voices, but I was unable to understand what they were saying. Someone was talking to someone on the other side of the barriers where the sedan had stopped. I exited my vehicle and made my way to the closest opening in the barriers, about 50 yards further. The parallel lane was marked off from the main road with orange construction equipment and fence. I could see 3 or 4 persons gathered around the automobile that was parked beneath what appeared to be a makeshift light setup. They appeared to be looking at something in the car's trunk, transferring items back and forth, while talking about whatever they were investigating with a level of concentration that suggested business rather than informal conversation, like they were following a timetable. One of them kept looking at his watch. Their actions had a practiced efficiency that suggested they had done this many times before, but I couldn't see clearly what they were handling because I was so far away. They understood exactly how long it should take, exactly what to do, and exactly where to stop. One of the figures glanced at me as I watched. I could tell he had noticed me even at that distance and in the low light. The others all turned to face me after he shouted something to them. I hurried back to my car, turned on the ignition, retreated into the construction lane, and exceeded the posted speed limit. I could see lights moving on the parallel route in my mirror, as if the sedan were following me once more. However, it appeared like there were multiple headlight sets now. About 3 miles later, the construction zone came to an end, and I returned to regular highway traffic. The sedan and additional cars that I thought would emerge from the parallel route never did. They appeared to have disappeared into the building site, engulfed by whatever activity they were conducting. The alternate lane without lights. In an attempt to make sense of what I had seen, I drove the remaining distance to Colorado Springs. It was obvious that traffic other than construction was using the adjacent path. The orderly activity at their stopping spot, the timing of the sedan's appearance, and the numerous cars that appeared to be coordinating their moves all pointed to something that was being concealed from regular highway traffic. I asked my mother whether she had heard anything about the highway project's adjustments and brought up the construction zone when I arrived at her house. She claimed that because the construction had been ongoing for so long, no one had noticed. No longer, however, something strange had been reported by her neighbor, who was employed by the State Transportation Department. He claimed that they continue to discover proof that illicit operations are taking place in the construction zones. She informed me of locations for meetings, storage spaces, etc. It seems to be an issue because some people have worked out how to exploit the fact that construction zones are monitored differently than normal highways. She was unaware of the type of prohibited activity when I asked. That's what he said. When you shut off, you create areas that aren't quite private and public by blocking off portions of highway for months at a time. And some people find those areas to be quite helpful. I returned through the work zone the next week, paying close attention to any openings in the barricades. They had been shifted, but they were still there. It seemed as though someone was continuously moving the entry points to the parallel route because of the changing placements and spacing. I also took note of something else, small reflective markings that are hardly noticeable unless you are looking for them, are positioned at random intervals along the main construction lane, like some sort of navigation system for those who understood what to look for. They appeared to match the openings in the barriers. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen throughout the next few weeks. In order to find any official documents regarding alternate routes or special access roads, I ended up conducting web research on the construction project. What I found was troubling. 3 extensions of the project's original completion date had been authorized with no public scrutiny. What I discovered about the building company itself was more worrisome. In addition to having contracts for highway work in regions where law enforcement had documented surges in smuggling activities and unexplained delays, Mountain Vista Construction has a history of cost overruns and delayed completions on similar projects throughout the region. Patterns of traffic. I began asking casual questions about the construction zone to other vehicles who frequently traveled Interstate 70. A few people made comments that made my skin crawl, but the majority only grumbled about the traffic jams and delays. During his nocturnal passes in the area, a truck driver named Rodriguez told me he had witnessed strange things. He claimed that cars were constantly entering and leaving that work area. Just ordinary cars, not construction vehicles. Occasionally, when I traveled east at midnight, they would be there, and when I returned west at 4 a.m., they would be gone. Even at off-peak hours, when the delays should have been minor. Another motorist, a woman employed by a delivery company, said that her GPS had begun to route her around the construction zone completely. It seems as though the system is aware of something that we are not, she remarked, as if it were attempting to keep regular traffic out of that region. The state highway patrol officer I spoke with at a truck stop had the most unnerving chat. He instantly grew defensive when I brought up the construction zone. He added, "We've had reports about that area, with caution. Nothing we can act on, nothing concrete, but drivers calling in suspicious activity. Strange lighting at night, vehicles where vehicles shouldn't be," he said with a pause. The issue is that construction zones are complicated legal areas. It's simple for things to slip through the cracks when there are numerous agencies, private contractors, and government monitoring. What sort of things? The types of events that occur with 20 meters of. There are several entry and exit sites on this controlled access road that aren't shown on any government maps. To be sure no one was listening, he glanced around. I would drive through that construction zone in the main lane if I were you. Avoid becoming interested in other routes. 3 months following my experience with the parallel lane, I came across a little story in the local newspaper that left me feeling really cold. "Construction zone drug bust yields record seizure," was the headline. The paper claims that a highly advanced distribution network functioning within the Interstate 70 construction area was busted by federal officials. Drugs valued at several $1 million were found during the bust, along with proof of money laundering and human trafficking activities. In order to transport illicit goods without being discovered by conventional highway monitoring systems, the network has been employing unofficial access points and detours through construction zones. However, it was a comment from the main investigator that truly grabbed my attention. At least 2 years had passed since this operation began, if not longer. Under the guise of the construction project, they were running a parallel transit system that was totally unaffected by regular law enforcement oversight. 2 years. In other words, the criminal network had been in operation on all of my prior visits through the construction zone, moving directly alongside regular traffic and taking advantage of the openings in the barriers that I had written off as construction errors. I reported my experience with the parallel lane to the FBI tip line that was listed in the article. My narrative did not really surprise the experienced agent who answered my call. During the research, we got scores more similar reports. Drivers who observed illegal conduct in the construction zone but were unsure of how to report it or who to call, she added. We can better grasp the extent of their operations thanks to your information. I inquired as to whether similar uses were being made of other building zones. Her response was unsettling. Temporary areas created by construction projects exist outside of established legal structures. Usually, someone will find a method to take advantage of any chance for exploitation. Construction on Interstate 70 was finished at an exceptionally rapid pace following the bust. The roadway resumed its regular traffic patterns after the barriers were taken down and the parallel lanes were eliminated. However, I became aware of something that disturbed me, that there had never been any removal of the little reflective indicators I had noticed along the main construction lane. They remained lodged in the pavement, seemingly useless for everyday traffic on the roadway. But occasionally, I question whether they have a new function, indicating possible sites for upcoming operations or directing those who are aware of what to look for to other development areas where comparable networks may be taking root. After realizing that those gaps weren't just sporadic openings or construction errors, I began driving a different route, which increased my journey time by an hour, but I avoided the region completely. They were purposefully made accessible. Identifies a covert network that ran parallel to the official route and catered to those who had good reason to stay away from the regular traffic flow. Additionally, I occasionally find myself searching for similar gaps, reflective marking patterns, and signs when driving late at night on other highways with construction zones, suggesting that there may be other routes running alongside the ones we're supposed to take. Because I now understand that there are other pathways besides the ones we perceive, people who have mastered the art of navigating the boundaries between official and unofficial, legal and dubious, visible and concealed, occasionally choose a different route directly beside the one that everyone else is following. The most disturbing aspect is realizing that despite the shutdown of that specific network, the fundamental vulnerability still exists. The same opportunities and temporary places that are not normally supervised are created by any long-term building project. Additionally, it's likely that other people use those areas for purposes that the Transportation Department never intended. The manifest for passengers about 6 months ago. I began driving with Ridge Share Plus. I primarily worked the late shift because the income was higher and I didn't mind staying up late. The system sent me to pubs, airports, and hotels where people needed rides since it was reasonably excellent at anticipating demand. However, I occasionally received requests that didn't entirely make sense, particularly after 2 a.m. the app contacted me for a passenger at mile marker 47 on Highway 12, about 20 meters outside the city, similar to the pickup request I received that Thursday night in November. It was not a residential street or business address, just coordinates on a dark section of highway with only farmland and the occasional truck stop. I nearly turned down the ride. It was against corporate policy to pick up passengers on highways, and doing so typically indicated an emergency or a broken-down car. However, the fare estimate of $85 for what appeared to be a 15-mile trip was abnormally high. I needed the money for the vacation. At mile marker 47, I noticed a man with a little suitcase on his shoulder, dressed in a business suit. He was well groomed and most likely in his 50s. Other than the fact that he was waiting for a ride at 2:30 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about him. When I stopped, he said, "You're Michael." He climbed into the back seat and gave me an address across town, where I confirmed, "I appreciate you accepting the late pickup. The highway runs are not very popular with drivers. Drivers often ran the highway as if it were a regular service. However, in my 6 months of driving 4 Rideshare Plus, I had never heard of such phrase or had a request for a pickup on a real highway. How did you end up out here?" As we turned back onto Highway 12, I inquired. "Work," was all he said. "We occasionally have late meetings, and scheduling transportation is simpler than worrying about parking." 2:30 a.m. work meetings on a rural highway. That looked peculiar, but I had learnt not to inquire too much about passengers' business, and individuals had strange schedules. I tried to dismiss the notion that this ride wasn't entirely usual and concentrated on driving. My phone rang with another pickup request 10 minutes into the journey. The software was providing me with "I just got the guy a ride from the same location at mile marker 52. This time, another truck on the highway, one more atypically high fare." I showed him the request on my phone and added, "Looks like you have colleagues out there." He nodded after taking a quick look at the screen. "Yes, we typically take different trips. Protocol for security." After pausing, he continued, "You ought to accept it. Most likely, they are already waiting." His tone gave the impression that this was more of an order from someone who expected to be followed than a recommendation. I agreed to the ride, primarily because the offer was too good to refuse, but also because I was beginning to wonder what sort of job it was that involved picking up several people in the middle of the night on dark highways. Another passenger was waiting on the shoulder when I returned to mile marker 52 for dropping off the businessman. In addition to being professionally attired, this woman in her 30s was carrying a small suitcase that bore a striking resemblance to the luggage of the first traveler. Without a word, she entered and gave me the address of the businessman's place, which was on the opposite side of town. She constantly checking her phone while we were driving, as if she was keeping track of a schedule or collaborating with someone. "Busy night." In an attempt to start a conversation, I inquired. "Always busy," I heard her say. "This is only the start. Tonight, our neighborhood is likely to send you more requests." She was correct. I received 7 more pickup requests from different mile marks along Highway 12 during the course of the following 3 hours. Everything from mile marker 45 to mile marker 55. Every traveler had the same suitcase and was professionally attired. They are all heading to various addresses throughout the city. I began asking more direct inquiries by the 5th pickup. From where did they originate? What sort of company ran on country roads? If they were all departing from the same general location, why didn't they just carpool? The responses were consistently courteous but evasive: meeting space, consulting, several locations, and security procedures. However, none of them provided a clear explanation for why 9 business-dressed individuals would be dispersed over 10 miles of highway at 3 in the morning, each requiring a separate vehicle to get to their respective locations within the city. The most peculiar aspect was how they all appeared to learn more about the other trucks. "I'll likely be receiving more inquiries from their colleagues," a number of travelers said. Additionally, a woman informed me that processing delays might cause the following passenger to be a few minutes late. Processing delays, as if they were all undergoing a process or checkpoint before being permitted to depart. I made the decision to be more specific in my queries during my 8th pickup. A younger man, possibly in his late 20s, was the passenger who appeared more anxious than the rest. As we drove away, he continued to glance back at the highway, as if he was afraid of being followed. "What kind of facility are you guys coming from?" I inquired. "I'm just curious, because I've never seen this many highway pickups in one night." After a long period of silence, he spoke. "Asking too many inquiries regarding the facility is not a good idea. Drivers who become overly interested in the operation are disliked by those who manage it. Which procedure? Merely getting people to their destinations. moving passengers from one place to another without too much paperwork or formal documents. After a moment, he added softly, "For some of us, there is little choice but to participate." I felt cold when I heard that statement. These weren't the victims you'd normally think of, but it sounded like he was talking about human trafficking. Professionals in nice clothes and carrying pricey bags. They took separate taxis to what seemed to be typical addresses all throughout the city. I spent a few minutes in my car after dropping him off, pondering my options. At mile marker 49, I still had one more pickup request outstanding, but something about the whole operation was starting to seem uneasy. To see what I could see, I made the decision to continue driving past mile marker 49 without stopping. I noticed more than one passenger waiting on the shoulder as I got closer to the pickup location. On a service lane that led to the highway, a number of automobiles were parked, and people were moving between them in a planned, methodical manner. It appeared to be a transfer operation of some sort. People are being led to waiting places along the highway after exiting a group of cars, where ride-sharing drivers like me will pick them up. A methodical procedure that avoids any central place that would draw attention while transporting individuals from one mode of transportation to another. I continued driving till I was far from Highway 12 and didn't stop. After determining that I had earned enough money for one night, I shut down my app and went home. I discovered something disturbing when I looked through my ride history the following morning. I finished 9 rides the night before, according to the app, but I only recalled 8 pickups. An entry was found for a passenger I had allegedly picked up at mile marker 51 and dropped off at an unfamiliar address. A comment and a 5-star rating were added to the ride's log. The driver was quiet and professional. They were suggested for any upcoming highway duties. I didn't remember that 9th pickup. I didn't remember driving to that specific address or going to mile marker 51, but I had been there. Based on the GPS history on my phone, the records on the app showed that I had finished the ride and been paid for it. I never again did any work in the Highway 12 region. Some passengers had invisible strings attached, and some rides are part of operations that drivers aren't allowed to recall fully. So I started turning down any pickup requests from rural roadways, even if the fares were always abnormally high. At the end of a long night, I occasionally look through my ride history and see entries for trips I can't quite remember with comments from passengers I can't quite imagine. This suggests that some people are adept at using ride-sharing applications for purposes that the firms never intended.